Well, hey there, and welcome back to Heimler's History. Now, we've been going through Unit 4 of the AP U.S. History curriculum, and in this video, we're going to talk all about the reform movement that sprang up in the first half of the 19th century. So, if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So in this video, we're basically trying to answer the following question. How and why did various reform movements develop and expand from 1800 to 1848? Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now the thing you need to remember about all of these movements is that they were largely occasioned by the profound cultural and economic shifts resulting from the market revolution, on which see the two videos I made on it. But the short version is that the market revolution really embedded the idea into Americans' minds that economic improvement was largely in their hands by virtue of hard work and industry. Additionally, with the movement of expanding democracy sweeping the nation, more and more people felt that they had agency in the affairs of their nation. And this gospel of improvement wasn't hard to apply to social reform as well. So let's consider these reform movements under four headings. We're going to talk about religious reform, temperance, abolitionism, and women's rights. So first, let's get down to religious reform movements. Now in the last video, we talked about utopian communities like the Shakers and the Oneida community, so I'll leave them out of this discussion. But instead, let's look at a movement begun in the 1840s which sought to reform Christianity. It was a new church established called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or for shortsies, the Mormons. The founder of Mormonism was a guy by the name of Joseph Smith, and as the story goes, he began receiving revelations from God one day in Palmyra, New York. He was instructed in these visions to go dig up some gold plates and with the help of a seer stone to translate those tablets. Now, it won't be important for you to know all the content of these visions, but the summary is basically this. The Church of Jesus Christ had strayed from the true teachings and witness of Christ, and Joseph Smith was God's appointed prophet to bring the church back to its true form. So he wrote these visions down in what became known as the Book of Mormon. And as Smith preached to the folks in New York and elsewhere, he gathered some devotees. But trouble began when he received subsequent visions and instructions from God commanding polygamy, which, in case you don't know, is marriage to multiple partners. The folks in Illinois, where Smith and his followers had migrated, thought that multiple wives was a reform too far, and so they subsequently arrested and lynched the prophet. And so it was the next prophet of the church, namely Brigham Young, who took up leadership of the Mormons and led them to migrate yet again, this time to the Utah territory, where they hoped to be far enough into the frontier to avoid any further anti-Mormon sentiment. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the reform movement centered around temperance. Temperance, when being defined, means the avoidance of alcoholic beverages. In the first half of the 19th century, it's not too much to say that people were deep into their cups. In fact, the general estimate is that for those who drank, the average consumption was something like 5 gallons of hard liquor per person per year, and that was a lot of liquor. It's kind of like my grandpappy used to say. You know, some people say that the glass is half full, others say that it's half empty, but I don't care as long as it's got whiskey in it. Now, the temperance movement was induced by the Second Great Awakening. It really began as a movement in the Protestant church through moral exhortation to cure social ills by abandoning alcohol, and to that end, the American Temperance Society was founded in 1826 by an association of clergy and businessmen. They directed most of their teetotaling efforts at working class men who, by any measure, drank more than anyone. And because of the intensifying moral influence of the Second Great Awakening, over 5,000 chapters of the American Temperance Society were established all across the country. This movement eventually found supporters in the halls of power, and that's when factory owners and politicians started enacting measures to crack down on drinking. It was an especially attractive proposal to them, since reformers claimed that temperance could increase productivity and reduce crime. Now, Irish and German immigrants rejected this movement wholesale, but at the end of the day, they didn't really have nearly enough political clout to do anything about it. Okay, now let's have a look at reform with respect to abolitionism. Now, abolitionism was a movement to bring an end to slavery, and the folks who made up this movement fell along a spectrum of those who wanted to bring a gradual end to the institution, all the way to those who wanted to end slavery immediately, no matter the cost to slave owners. Again, the Second Great Awakening had a lot of influence here, especially convincing a lot of folks that slavery was a sinful institution, and when understood that way, it made compromise very difficult to reach. And one of the main voices of this movement was William Lloyd Garrison, who published an abolitionist newspaper called the Liberator. He argued that white folks needed to take a stand against slavery by means of moral persuasion and not by violence, and to that end, Garrison established the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833, which spread rapidly across the North. But even though Garrison argued for persuasive means of ending slavery, that didn't mean he wasn't pretty radical. He believed that slavery had to come to an immediate immediate end and went so far as to publicly burn the Constitution, claiming that it was a pro-slavery document. Another sector of the abolitionist movement was comprised of free blacks and escaped slaves, the most famous of which was the magnificent orator Frederick Douglass. Douglass was himself an escaped slave who taught himself to read and write after his master forbade such education, and after escaping to the north, he found his way under Garrison's influence, but eventually broke away from him to establish his own movement. Douglass published an exceedingly important book on his own experience with slavery called The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, and in it he emphasized the dehumanization that occurred not only in the person who was enslaved, but also the simultaneous dehumanization that had to occur in the slaveholder in order to perpetuate that institution. And finally, let's have a look at women's rights during this period. This movement grew up right alongside the abolitionist movement, and many women who were members of the American Anti-Slavery Society found within themselves a growing frustration that although they wanted to advocate for abolitionism, their status as women made that very difficult. Remember in the last period we talked about the cult of domesticity and the idea of separate spheres for men and women in society. Under that scheme, the moral reformation of society was man's work, not for the ladies who might injure themselves if they thought too hard about an issue. Regardless, many women decided that if they were going to advocate the way that they wanted to, they needed more rights for themselves. And that's how you get the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. Now, this was a convention called to address women's rights in American society, and it was led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. Under their leadership, the convention drafted a document codifying their desires known as the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, which was cast in the form of the Declaration of Independence, and it said this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." That is saucy. And it goes on to list the grievances of women against a society that has repeatedly disenfranchised them and treated them as second-class citizens. Now, their efforts wouldn't bear the fullness of its fruit for another 70 years or so, but this was the time when women planted their flag in the ground and refused to give up what was rightfully theirs. Well, alright, that's what you need to know about Unit 4, Topic 11 of the AP U.S. History curriculum. And if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then click right here and grab my review packet. You could also click on this playlist right over here for more videos from Unit 4. And if you want me to keep making these videos, then by all means, subscribe. Heimler out.